Hey guys, welcome back to the D-Res podcast. This is Neon, and I have another very special guest with me today, Mr. Jason Lenox.
Hey, everyone.
Say hello.
Hello.
Jason is an artist, and he is a huge fan of fantasy comics, and he's a longtime friend of the channel. Known Jason for a very long time, and he's going to sit in. We're going to talk about Heavy Metal Magazine. We're going to talk about fantasy comics. We're going to talk about the indie comics scene, and we're going to see where this conversation goes, right?
Can't wait. It's an odyssey we're going to take together, Neon.
An odyssey. All right. Hey, Jason, for those of you who are listening who are not familiar with you, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
So my name is Jason Lenox. I go by Lenox Artist on most social medias. And I do art and make comics in my free time. So I've done 11, 12 funded comic book and art books and one coloring book project, which is a total of 13 Kickstarters. And I'm currently working on my 13th. So I've been in the crowdfunding scene since 2012 when I did my first one. So working on my 13th one, which is the 5th issue of my science fiction fantasy comic book, Lords of the Cosmos, which has been a labor of love. I've been working on the new issue for about 2 years at this point, because my goal is to have it 100% done and ready to go before it even goes on Kickstarter and then to Indiegogo as a follow-up campaign. So I've been in that space for a long time. I love making comics, and I love telling stories, and I love talking about fantasy and science fiction comic books, which is exactly why I'm here tonight. So in a nutshell, that's me.
Awesome. So let's talk about this. Yeah, we go way back. We were just talking about before I started recording. I mean, we're talking probably like 13, 14 years now, I think. We did the convention scene together.
I think I met you at a show, you and Geeky, back in like 2012, maybe, or 2013, something like that. And I've always enjoyed, having these conversations about just independent comics and everything else. And you've been kind of part of my extended comic book family for a long time. Yeah. So it's great. It's great to be on the show.
Yeah. So, we used to do a lot of the same cons. Now, Western Pennsylvania, I don't think people realize just like how much of a comic book culture we have on this side of the state. Like there's just so much, Pennsylvania just in general, like, there's just so much there's so many nerds. We have a lot of nerds. I would say we probably have more nerds per capita than any other state, save for maybe New York. But we have a lot of conventions. We have a lot of comic shops still. Pittsburgh area, we still have a ton of comic shops. And, the scene's actually, it's so weird because, if you would go to, especially, Pittsburgh, you might get the impression that the comic book industry is fine, but then you go the rest of the country and it's kind of like, it seems to be kind of struggling in a lot of ways.
It's getting wild because we had a couple comic book shows I was at this year. So I was at Happy Valley Comic Con in State College. I was at Zenkai Con in Lancaster. I was at SetsuCon in Altoona, and I was talking to a buddy of mine, and I'm like, this year alone in like central Western Pennsylvania, there's going to be shows in Lancaster, Hershey, Harrisburg, Carlisle, across the border in Hagerstown. There's 4 state, Altoona, 3 times, State College, right? And I was just like, there is now a comic book show in like every hamlet and village. And again, going back into the Wayback Machine, I remember the first shows I went to were like one day fun day shows in York, Pennsylvania, I believe at a Holiday Inn near the Caterpillar plant. And my cousin and I would go to it, and it was like, oh my goodness, there is a one-day show at a hotel, and it was like, oh my goodness, a show. And I actually I remember the first one I went to. There was one creator who actually just was Joe Monks, who was the original creative partner on Cry for Dawn. and
Oh yeah.
Joe just passed away.
Oh no.
And he was a super guy. I was friends with him on Facebook, and every now and then we would message. And super cool guy. And I told him, I remember meeting you back in like 91 or 92. And then I didn't see anything from a while. And I just saw that he passed away. And he was a super cool dude. And but back then, like early 90s, like, oh my goodness, there's a comic book show. And it was like, they were just very basic, like a lot of comic book dealers with wall books. And, I remember going with like a list and like, oh, I got to get this book and that book. And again, that there was a creator. And I remember when I met Joe, I mean, he was like, hey, you should buy my book. And I remember thinking like, that's like, what? To me, the people that made comics were almost not even real.
Yeah.
Like there's a guy here that made a book and, he's like, my book's really good. And I think it was like Cry for Dawn 3. And he's like, it's $5, and I was like, oh, that's so expensive. But I bought it because he made it very personal. Like, hey, and you're like, a creator spoke to me. I have to buy it. And it was a great book. And I still remember it. So that was like my first comic book creator real life encounter. But I mean, but it's so changed now where it's like there's so many. And, it's just a different space we're inhabiting now.
Yeah, it's definitely, it does seem, and it's almost like it's we got the juxtaposition of it not being as personal because it doesn't seem like people are, I don't know. It seems like a lot of comic book readers now maybe aren't connecting at shows like they used to, or a lot of shows don't have people that actually read comic books anymore. And that's a whole nother discussion. But then also I think it's almost too close for comfort where, we got social media and we got a lot of problems that are coming up in social media because of people getting too familiar with, the people that make the stuff. Sometimes, everybody's got to air all their opinions out and, hilarity and tragedy sometimes ensue. But yeah, it was a big deal back then. I remember, I think the first show I went to, it was one of those small shows and I'm trying to think where it was. I know it was the artist on Nomad at the time, I think was the guy there. And like you said, they were usually just a couple of guests. You're lucky if they had artists. They never had editors at those shows. And, I was a dumb kid and I was like taking my really, really garbage pages to this show to talk to this artist who I thought somehow could maybe give me pointers on how to get a job. And he's like, dude, I went to art school and I'm like 15 years older than you are. So, and I just broke in like last year.
I just looked it up on my phone. Joe Monks was born in 1968 and he passed away August of last year, age 55. So rest in peace, Joe Monks. Super dude.
He wasn't that old?
He was in his 50s. And
wow.
Like I said, I'm like, wait, I remember. Yeah, I just wanted to double check myself. I'm like, hope he's like, hey, I didn't die. But no, he did pass away. Super guy. And it was only just kind of chatting on Facebook, but I had a couple nice conversations with him, and just seemed like a first class guy. And like I said, I just remember that really fun encounter when I was a teenager. Super guy.
That's a real shame. Yeah, I remember Cry for Dawn was like huge. That was huge back in the day.
Yeah,
and just kind of like it's one of those things where we had all these like really big. I mean, talk about that. Like we had a lot of indie comics, and we had a lot of them were fantasy. I mean, I'm thinking ElfQuest, and I saw a really cool video. I can't remember the guy's name, but he does these really in-depth comic book videos, and he did one on Rob Liefeld, but he did one on the Peonies, and he talked about ElfQuest and how they got like really close to getting like all these Hollywood deals, and it didn't happen, but now they're finally getting an animation deal. But just kind of the road to getting that published. But yeah, it seemed like a lot of fantasy, at least here in the US, came from the indie scene, and a lot of it seemed to be influenced by French publications like Heavy Metal Magazine, and then we had Marvel had Epic Illustrated. So maybe if we're going to talk about fantasy comics and we're going to talk about different fantasy comics we've read, maybe we should start kind of at the beginning of, or what of Heavy Metal Magazine, kind of the state it's in right now. I think we've talked about it a little bit. Actually, I've given you a hat tip a couple of times because you were letting me know that Heavy Metal was in trouble, like big trouble.
So I love Heavy Metal Magazine, and I kind of walk in as a fan. So I remember it would have been like middle school, like 7th or 8th grade. I remember being aware that heavy metal existed because when I was much younger, I saw a bootleg VHS copy of the movie that scared me when I was like 7, right? And so I had this awareness that it existed, again, in an analog world where, you know, it was like I heard there's this, you know, kind of like really out there comic book. And I remember it was kind of like at newsstands, kind of like segregated towards like the Playboy Penthouse stuff, but not quite. And I remember I picked up the March 1989 issue, which actually is a great issue if you want to pick up a back issue. It has a Luis Royo cover, but it had a full-length Juan Jimenez, like watercolored, gorgeous sci-fi story in it called Leo Roa. And that issue, I mean, hands down, it was a great issue to pick up, really blew my mind. And I was like, this is amazing. And then over the next, you know, year, I remember hiding that from my parents at my house. And you know, like I had to keep this, you know, oh my goodness, I have this Heavy Metal Magazine, which had some, you know, European style nudity and violence in it. But it kind of blew my mind as an American, you know, kid comics fan, primarily reading Marvel with a dash of DC, because this was different. This was like, we've gone way outside the box.
Yeah.
So over the years, you know, I got more into it, and then I kind of, as I got older, put more time and money into building the collection backwards, and then I kind of picked up on the roots of where it came over in that mid 70s, where there was Metal Hurlant, right, the French publication, and then it was kind of tied into like National Lampoons. So there's kind of this weird collective DNA.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, they published it.
Like,
yeah.
So there's like this Animal House, you know, Blues Brothers, Heavy Metal the movie, DNA, National Lampoons, where you saw some of the actors and writers like were connected. Harold Ramis was one of the voices, I believe, in the cartoon, and he was, you know, big at National Lampoon. So this ties to like Ghostbusters. So there's that early 80s DNA, and then the European artists were coming over in the magazine, and you could kind of feel the magazine was taking an editorial stance, kind of like Rolling Stone, but it was its own like music, politics, fashion. And from going back and collecting a lot of those old issues from the 70s and 80s, it's like a time capsule where you're kind of getting a feel for like, these are people that are coming at you with a very unique editorial opinion. And as a collector and a reader, I really kind of grew to appreciate that this publication was trying to give you some really cool art and tell some great stories, but it was really advocating for, you know, politics, music, but it was like, it was fun and it was cool. And then as I recall, you know, there was an ownership change at some point in the 90s where Kevin Eastman bought it.
Yeah.
And he bought the magazine. And, you know, there was a shift, you know, in how he, you know, his editorial and his stewardship of it. And if I'm remembering correctly, he was married to Julie Strain at the time.
I believe so. Yes.
And again, you could tell because there was a lot of Julie Strain stuff in the magazine with like covers and things like that. So around, you know, again, kind of dipping back into my personal experience, around like that 07, 08 time, Heavy Metal still had like a bulletin board on their website. And again, it was kind of a pre-proto social media era. And I remember myself and a bunch of other fans were always kind of on the bulletin boards, kind of complaining about the quality of the magazine, but like on their bulletin board. And that we kind of didn't really feel that the magazine was doing all that it could do. And there was a certain point where Heavy Metal said on their bulletin board, we're going to wrap this up and we're going to move everything to Facebook, right? Kind of going back to, right, where it's like, we don't want to have our own bulletin board. We're going to go to social media. And I remember a bunch of people on there were like, well, we like talking to each other. Like we should somehow connect. And and I remember chatting with a few people on there and said, well, why don't we make our own story? And I was kind of thinking I wanted to make some comics at the time. And I ended up connecting with two folks on there. One gentleman was a letterer, and there was another gentleman that said he was a writer. And I had a really simple idea for a 5-page, 6-page short story. I said, let's make a story. I'll draw it. You write it, you letter it, and I'll draw it, and we'll submit it. And I could send you the emails, Tom, or Neon G. Sorry, they're bizarre.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
They're bizarre.
I'd love to see that. I would love to see that.
So the gentleman that was the writer, I had a really simple pitch for my first story, and I said, "Could you write this?" And it was basically kind of an Outer Limits kind of story where I was like, "Hey, there's some guys in kind of like gas mask suits, and they're chasing down what they call like a pest, and then it turns out the pest is a person, and they're aliens." Like, just really simple. And it was so funny because the gentleman that said he was a writer, he wrote like this huge script that was incredibly confusing. And I read it, and I wrote him back, and I said, I don't really know that this is what I was even talking about. And this guy just blew up in my email and just blasted me and called me names. God. And the guy that was the letterer was like, I think I could write that. This is kind of freaking me out. I'll look for the emails and send them to you. They're so strange. And then that gentleman and I made a little story called Vermin, and we submitted it to Heavy Metal. So this is kind of like the Jason Heavy Metal saga.
Yeah,
and this would have been around that 2010, 2011 time period. And I sent it in, and I didn't hear a peep. And then that gentleman and I made another little 12-page short story, and we sent it out to Heavy Metal. And again, there was no immediate response. And then I started poking the bear. And I'll never forget this. And it was kind of a light bulb going off moment where somebody wrote back from Heavy Metal and said, hey, real good, but we really don't have space for this right now. Maybe in about 10 years we could use it. And I was like, wow, okay. And I remember looking at the calendar and thinking, that's going to be in a very long time. And you're going to laugh about this, because this is what actually got me to do a comic book show. Is I remember thinking, well, I could wait for these people to let me in, or I could just go do it myself. And I went to a commercial printing company that does a lot of blueprints where I live. And I said, can we make this into a book? And I had all the page files, and they said, yeah, we could, make that and fold it, we could do that for you. Mm. And then they just made me a couple boutique prints of my book, and we called it Ugly Studios Presents #1, just like these 2 stories. That's all it was. Yeah. And then I ended up reaching out on the internet to the folks in Williamsport that were hosting the Scranton Comic-Con. So that indirectly led to me going to my first show with my one book it was like June 2012. Right. Okay. And I went and I had like a stack of like 10 books, and I just went there and said, I have a book. And I sold like 8 of them. And I was like, ooh, you know what I mean? And then, and I had done a little crowdfunder to pay for like the coloring and printing. So if you look on my Kickstarter resume, which is like forever, I raised like $1,100 or $1,200 on that book back in like 2012. So it's interesting now with, and I was kind of laughing about this to some friends, and I think even on a podcast or two, that, it's weird now as these things kind of progress through your life, is I'm like, I'll come back in 10 years. And look, was that work good enough to be in there? Probably not. Right. But we all love our own work a lot. Maybe it could have been, who knows? But now the magazine apparently is done.
Yeah. So So it was, Kevin Eastman had it and then sold it to some other publishing company that basically just became like a brand, right? Because it seemed like they had a lot of American comic book artists that basically the people that do the Marvel, the DC, the Dark Horse stuff, they were doing, at least from where I was sitting, correct me if I'm wrong here, but from where I was sitting, it looked like we had a lot of the same names that already were doing the mainstream stuff. It wasn't like they were bringing as many European creators over. Is that kind of what was going on?
So there was one of the cool things about being a fan of Heavy Metal was that it was different. So like, for example, right, if you look at the older issues, they were like monthly, like a magazine where it's like January 78 or whatever. Mm-hmm. Then in like 87 or 88, they became quarterly. So it would say like, fall 89 or fall 88. But then in 89, when I picked it up again, it went bi-monthly. So it went to back, like, so the first issue I got was March 89. And then at a certain weird point because I stopped collecting it around that time, 08, 09, because I was like, I just don't like the quality of the book. It was getting more expensive, and I just didn't think it was that good. Is that a couple years ago, before they stopped publishing, apparently, they switched it over like, oh, it's issue 267. And it was like, okay, stop making this more like U.S. comics, because a big part of the fun of this is that it was different. It's exotic.
Yeah.
I don't want it to be like a Marvel comic. I'm getting it because it's weird and European and different. And it did seem, and again, I think my collection goes from like 1977 up to about probably about 2011. I think I kept collecting till about then. Then I just stopped. I'd have to go check. I have them all in their long boxes. But, I would see things in passing, and you're not wrong. It did seem like it was, trying to be more like an American comic with the numbering and more U.S. artists. And again, like, look, we all love our U.S. artists, but it's like,
right.
Like, I'm not buying Heavy Metal to see like the people that are doing pinups for DC. It's like, no, I want to see weird French watercolors. Like, that's what I don't want.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not coming here to see, the guys that are doing variant covers for Batman. Like, I don't want that. And
I'm looking at the cover. This cover here about Tarna. It's got like Patrick Zurcher, and I think Stephanie Phillips wrote it. And I'm like, these are people that work for DC Comics. Like, no, I'm not knocking these people. I'm gonna be clear, because I'm getting people talking to them. No, I'm just saying, like, if you want to see that, you buy DC Comics. You want to see Heavy Metal, you buy Heavy Metal, right?
Exactly. And again, I'm with you. There's nothing. These are all super talented creators, but it's like we're not going to this publication to get the usual suspects that are here. And I mean, look, in fairness, and we were talking about it in our pre-show chat, I think a lot of these legacy print brands are, the Mad Magazine, Sports Illustrated, Playboy, and I'm not 100% up to date on Sports Illustrated. I think some financial company just bought them, like, kind of to save it. But then there was something recently, and again, I may be not 100% correct, but I think they just had some pretty big layoffs. That those print juggernauts from years in the past, like when Sports Illustrated did things, it was a big deal, right? When Playboy was like, oh my goodness, we can't believe they have this person in the magazine. I just seen recently, I didn't really realize like some of the controversies with some of the folks in the magazine, the ladies when they posed in Playboy. I had forgotten how controversial some of those things were. And I can't think of her name. She had won Miss America, and then she was in Playboy, and it was like a huge scandal. And today, it's like, is there any does that cultural relevance still exist for those things? I don't think it does, and I think Heavy Metal is kind of lumped into that, where this is a legacy brand. People know that tilting. They know the tilting. I try to do it like in reverse, right? They know that logo. But I mean, how many issues does it sell in 20? Well, I mean, before it is on hiatus, right? I don't know. But
I don't know what's up with that. I just went out to their Twitter, and they haven't updated since the beginning of last year. Well,
and again, I may not be 100% correct, but I am pretty sure they had solicited a new like number one, and then it was just like no, right?
Yeah.
And maybe that was like a year ago. And again, like I'm really like they had, because they, like I said, they had changed the numbering, and it was like, we're going to have a new number one, and they had all these variant covers and everything. And I just think it just didn't happen.
Yeah, I think it's just, when you change it that much, you've got your diehards. And I think, something like Heavy Metal could live as a niche collectible. I think that is actually a prime candidate for crowdfunding. Like, I could totally see this being a magazine that, like, as a prestige album format magazine. We put it out even quarterly, but it's got like the best of of the fantasy comics in Europe now. We're going to bring the best of the best stateside and give them a fantastic treatment. I mean, I know I worked on different collections for like Fantagraphics. I did a lot of the Disney stuff, and they brought a lot of the European comics over here too, and they would put them in this prestige format. And there is a market for that, but you can't just take something like heavy metal and throw American art. And I'm not knocking these people. I'm sure they're talented, but I'm just saying there has to be something different about it to warrant the price tag, because it is a more expensive publication, right?
You know what it would be like if you and I went to like Germany and then went to like McDonald's, and you'd be like,
no, that's exactly it.
And again, I like McDonald's, and it would be cool to go to Germany, but why would we go there? Why would we go there to be like, I'm going to get a fries and Big Mac, and you'd be like, you traveled halfway across the world to get
right
anywhere here. So yeah, and I just think, like I said, I will always love my heavy metal back issues. They're great, and they're fun to pull out every now and then and glance through one. And there's some really cool stuff, and I enjoyed buying them and collecting them and reading them. But I would say I don't know that can come back. I don't know. Maybe like it's not a comic book, but it kind of reminds me of heavy metal. I've always been a fan of that found footage horror series VHS. I just think they're cool.
Oh my God. You need to talk to my son. Okay. That's his favorite. That's his favorite series. He actually, for Halloween one year when he was like, oh my God, he was maybe 14. He went as was it Rattata, the rat from the.
Oh, that rat was Ratma.
Ratma. Yeah. Oh my God. I was talking Pokemon. I got all crap. Ratma. Yeah. The rat monster. He went as like a cultist for that. Yeah.
Like, to me, that series, the VHS series, should never end, because whether the films are good or bad, it's kind of like make another one. I mean, they're just little shorts. So to me, like the strength of heavy metal should be, to your point, maybe the future is that someone buys the brand and like solicits stuff, and then they crowdfund it. I mean, again, things are constantly evolving. Again, the things we've seen just in our lives, again, it's always changing. It's the only guarantee is change. So again, I think heavy metal could find another life, because it really, I mean, there's the artists that we think of with heavy metal are probably Richard Corbin, Mobius, Juan Jimenez, Inky Bilal, and we love all those artists, right? And we've lost some of them, which is sad.
Yeah.
But it was never any one artist or any one thing. So, I mean, to me, that's a strength that there's that, there's such a diversity of creators that they've had over the decades, that like it was, even though Richard Corbin was just top tier, like he was like, nobody was the magazine. The brand was heavy metal. So I do think there is a silver lining that it could be anybody. But who owns it? Who owns it?
I don't even know who owns it now. They said they have a new CEO. That's what I was trying to figure out. It's just Heavy Metal Entertainment LLC as of 2022, according to the website. They had a message from the new CEO in 2023. That was the last thing that they tweeted. And I went out to their shop, and it looks like they didn't pay the bill on Shopify.
Okay, so I just took a look here on my phone. Like, I feel like a investigative reporter. So there was an article in Bleeding Cool that Whatnot / Massive cancels heavy metal, will not publish volume 2.
Oh my God.
So that, remember when I was saying that they changed it to the issue numbers, like they were, like, so all the heavy metals that we could think of apparently were volume 1. And then Whatnot, which I thought was like an auction service for comic book art. Maybe
I don't know what this. Okay, so there's all kinds of weirdness going on with comics right now. I don't know. All these new startups are coming out, and they're all like, "We're the future of comics." And they've got like Whatnot and Distillery, and they all have this funky, like they all think they're like a freaking coffee shop or a microbrew or something. These, but it's like I don't. I think what they're doing, I think what a lot of these companies are doing, and I could be wrong, but I don't think a lot of them are about comics. I don't think they're about the craft of comics. I don't think they're in love with comics. I think they're looking for IP to pimp out to Hollywood. I'm looking at this in like heavy metal. It seems like they're really pushing Tarna because she's marketable. And that's the character of like, oh, that's the woman in the bikini on the pterodactyl on the box. Everybody knows Tarna, right?
Yeah, she was, I mean, honestly, if you think about it, because of the movie, she was the only recognizable IP character that wasn't owned by someone else, because truly that was creative properties. Because you look at that movie, right?
Yeah.
Den, that was a Richard Corbin IP, and I just messaged you the article where they shut it down. You can check it out. They did a mimic of the Death of Superman cover for the final issue, and then Tony Moore did a reinterpretation of the Heavy Metal 1 cover, the robot beating on the other one, and then that didn't. Yeah, that's the article. I lost my train of thought there. Shoot. So it's like a lot of those characters from the original movie were, owned by others. So the robot with the big ears, those were all from So Beautiful and So Dangerous. So they were all other people's IP. So really, Tarna was like the only IP that was theirs. I mean, you know what I mean? That was like heavy metal. So, and it's a attractive, lady character, and she was cool and everyone liked her. So I do understand them marketing her. And again, I'm going to go in another geek direction, but this is my problem with it. When the Borg were cool on Star Trek, they were just like these faceless drones.
Yes.
The Borg became less cool when it's like, well, there's a character, now there's a queen. It's like heavy metal. Like, I don't want a character represent. Like, I want heavy metal to. Again, this is just my own personal opinion. I wanted it to be. It's. There isn't a character. So I mean, I think even to me, it's like you're really, really trying hard to be like an American superhero company. Even that thing you've got there in the screen now. Where it's like,
I'm looking at this. This is crazy.
Why? No. And look, and here's the thing. I love my DC and Marvel stuff. Like, I love that stuff, right? And I've really grown to appreciate the Death of Superman storyline, like, over the years. Like, I think the more I think about it and know what those creators did, I think it's cooler. But it's like, I don't want it in Heavy Metal magazine. It's almost like putting gravy in yogurt, where it's like, I like gravy on mashed potatoes, and I love yogurt. I would never put them together, even though separately I think they're great.
Yeah. So I'm explaining for people listening to this, what we're looking at is we're looking at this article from Bleeding Cool, and they're talking about how, heavy metal is kind of not in a very good place right now. And they're not going to do any more after volume 1, but they have the cover for the Whatnot version of Heavy Metal, and it homages the death of Superman.
That's the final one. Yes.
The death of Heavy Metal. Like, pardon my French, come the fuck on. I mean, seriously, what is it? I just got done saying that, like, I have nothing against DC artists and writers. I don't want to see them in Heavy Metal magazine. It should be the best of what Europe is publishing right now. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe the problem is, it is a different time, because I mean, there are some amazing comics coming out of Europe, some fantastic albums coming out of Europe, and that whole scene is actually thriving over there. It's kind of like manga. It's just like, it's a totally different landscape. But it could be that the publishing rights for the best stuff are tied up with other publishers, or the creators, they want a bigger cut. They don't want to just say, like, oh yeah, we're so lucky to have these Americans publish our comics,
So one of my favorite European comics that kind of saw the light of day in some of the heavy metals that I collected was called Requiem, Chevalier Knight. And Pat Mills, I'm 99% sure, is the writer. Super crazy comic book about vampires and hell. And I think it was probably an expensive licensing, to get that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's they would publish like one chunk a year for years. There's the Tony Moore cover. So I think you're probably not wrong, is that as the economics and ownership of all these things changed to get that top tier French, English, European, Italian talent. Maybe it just costs too much. I mean,
Yeah.
I love live music, and I know there's massive, I love listening to you and Geeky talk about the comic book scene and all those rabbit holes. But then there's a rabbit hole of live music, and I follow that stuff too, where there's a lot of anger with recording artists that the big anger there seems to be with merch. Or like, let's say you have a venue, you're demanding, oh, hey, if you and Geeky are doing a concert, I want 48% of your merch sales. So like, the economics of all this stuff keeps changing. And then it's like, why aren't these little bands touring? It's like, because they'll lose money. They can't make any money doing this. So at a certain point, it doesn't work. So like bands from the past, it's like, well, how did some of these older bands, I mean, they may have just gotten to make, they could sell records at the mall, and they could, hey, we get to keep all of our profit on t-shirts and whatever. So, a legacy band, an Iron Maiden or a Judas Priest, right? Their ability to make money versus a new band today, the environment's completely different. And again, I don't know all the background of all these things with heavy metal, but I think you're probably right. It's probably gotten more difficult, for them to license things. Like, what's the cost?
Yeah, that's why I'm kind of wondering, because it looks like, I'm looking at the names that they had here, and Ben Templesmith and stuff like that, Jim Mahfood and Tony Moore, and they're all Western American creators, right? I don't know. It's interesting because it was great. It was like almost like a sampler of what was being produced in Europe. These fantastic comics, but again, a lot of those series were massive. Long, years long, decades long series. And so to get these like little chunks of, here's an 8-page story, here's a 10-page story, here's 12 pages. Yeah, that was really cool though, because it was easily digestible. You could pick up, for the most part, any issue of heavy metal. And I got into it. My friend Craig actually gave me his brother's Heavy Metal and Epic Illustrated, which Epic was the Marvel, kind of the Marvel answer, which was pretty cool. And that was, I remember, because I had most of the Jim Starlin's Metamorphosis storyline, which would eventually become Dreadstar. And it was really dark. It was like really, compared to the Dreadstar that we got, it was like this really dark, beautifully drawn pencil work but it was cool because you could pick up these issues even out of order for the most part, unless it was something like the Dreadstar story, and just get a whole bunch of like little mini comics, and they were wild premises. And like you said, it's kind of like Boba Fett originally. Like, you didn't have a lot of backstory, and it was cool because it was just like, oh, there's like robots and boobs, and I don't know what's going on, but it looks pretty cool, and it's all done with watercolor. Wow, that's pretty neat. We don't see that in American comics. Yeah. And now we're trying to make, again, those characters, kind of those brands, marketable, and it's not special. That's sad, isn't it? Like, a lot of stuff is just nothing special.
And here's the thing. I think one of the funnest parts I had as a collector and a young reader of heavy metal was discovering a Simon Bisley doing Slain, and like going down the rabbit hole of what's in 2000 AD, and like discovering all these other things that Pat Mills and Simon Bisley did, because you saw that little taste, right? Yeah. The dealer gave you a sample, and now you want more. I remember I fell in love with Juan Jimenez from that very first heavy metal. And I've gone out of my way over the years to collect his hardback collections and get involved with the Meta Barons and fall in love with that. And again, I'm pretty sure this, I'll have to check myself, but I believe Juan passed away because of COVID. He was one of the he was an older gentleman. Yeah. And to me, when I remember reading about him passing away, I was like, this is a guy that I've just loved for years. And I was like, this sucks, because he was so talented. And but he was one of those people that I discovered reading heavy metal, and I enjoyed him for 31 or 32 years of just enjoying everything he did. He's one of my favorite comic book artists ever. And, I found him through heavy metal. So, Neon, as a comic book geek, when you have those discoveries, I mean, these are things you can love for your whole life. And the heavy metal was great in introducing you to stuff that was not, it was like harder to get. So like when you discovered this, it was like a secret, like, whoa, like who's this guy from, wherever, Brazil or France? And
yeah,
it was awesome. Like you just find these cool things.
It was almost like, I hate to make the analogy with like hipsters, music, but it did feel like you're listening to a really cool band for the first time, and you're like one of just a handful of people that have heard this group, and you're like, I know they're going to go somewhere. I know the Beatles, they're going to go somewhere someday. And, I kind of had that with, I think he was already a big name, but I remember, Simon Bisley, his stories. And then eventually I would get into, cause he was doing, Dread in 2000 AD, but then, he finally crossed over here to the US with, I remember the Batman Judge Dredd comic, which I freaking loved. I love that thing. Yeah. The cover of that thing was about falling off. I used to read it so much. I would just stare at it for hours. Like, I don't know how he did this shading. I don't know why this looks photorealistic, but I know he did it with paint, but I don't know what kind of paint he's using, but I'd love to find out. I'd love to be able to draw like this someday.
Yeah.
And it was just different.
So, I mean, and again, I don't want to write heavy metal off because it isn't like I said, to me, it's never been anything. It's been anomalous, right? And that's the beauty of it. It's everybody, but it's nobody. It's every artist, but it's no artist. That like, I don't want to say that it's gone. In my mind, I want to believe that it's on hiatus. Now, maybe the hiatus is another year, 6 months, maybe it's a decade. Who's to say? But I hold out hope that it may come back. Hopefully it's cool. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know where it's going to go.
I think it'll come back, but I think the spirit of heavy metal definitely lives on in indie publishing. I know we've seen a lot of on Kickstarter, especially. We've seen a lot of fantasy anthologies that have that kind of that heavy metal vibe to them. And so I guess we can segue. Let's talk about your comic in Kickstarter, because you're going to be doing another comic on Kickstarter, right?
So I'm going to kind of go into where I've been with my next comic, and I'm going to talk about where I see the business of crowdfunding for me and probably everybody else, and my thoughts on it. So the biggest issues that I've seen with comics on crowdfunding is creators taking money and then having ridiculous delays or not getting the books out. I think that's really bad. I think another huge negative around comic books on crowdfunding is people doing work and then not being paid, right? Where it's like, hey, I wasn't paid. And then I think there is kind of an ongoing, spat about, are people using AI? Are they not using AI? So, and then on top of all that, it ties back into the world of printing, shipping, and inflation. So one of the things is I've been working on my last book, and I would share this with anybody doing a crowdfunded comic, is that I'm now doing this differently. I'm doing all of my work up front, and I'm paying for everything up front because I want to have the book 100% done before it goes on the platform, because I want to do the reverse of the people with massive delays. I think that's really hurt the indie crowdfunding scene because of these massive delays and excuses. And the other thing is, and I don't want to say the crowdfunder, it was for something I backed. It actually wasn't a comic book, but it was a printed book. And the creator took forever to get it out. And there was a massive increase in printing and shipping costs. And then he sent a message out to all of us that backed it, basically blasting us for making him lose money. And I love the creator and I loved what he made, but I thought this is one of the most in poor taste messages ever. And then he wrote an apology, which was nice, but it still sticks with me, where it's like, I didn't hurt your project. You took too long. And you didn't factor in the fact that inflation and shipping are like not steady. So I kind of took that as a backer. It really was upsetting to me. Like, I paid you what you asked for. It's not my fault. You did it wrong. And it was very unprofessional and in poor taste to people that gave this gentleman quite a bit of money for his project. And so that's really stuck with me with Lords of the Cosmos 5, where people are like, where's the book? Where's the book? Where's the book? Where's the book? And I'm like, I'm not quite done. I'm going to get it done. And your delays are up front. And your delays are when you're not giving me money. So I don't feel bad about telling you to wait.
Yeah, it's strange because I mean, I can see both sides of it. I mean, readers are impatient a lot of times. A lot of people just don't. I mean, I know our last crowdfunder, we were going to start shipping. It was supposed to be in March. We actually wound up being a couple months late. And there's a funny story. Well, it's not really a funny story. It's actually a horrible story. But the story behind it, things were out of our control. But we had people like on March 1st, where's my book? I'm like, it's March 1st. We said we're going to start shipping in March. Where's my book? I'm like, I can just give you your money back. I mean, they're on their way here. Like, I can just but yeah. So, I mean, I think sometimes too with, crowdfunding, I think there needs to be like education on both sides. Cause I think sometimes backers think they're just going to Amazon and pushing a button and buying a book.
Sure.
And I think, but then the opposite of that is, creators are taking money and they don't realize, we have to deliver a book at the end of it. And, there are costs associated with that a lot of times they don't factor in. I've seen a lot of people be like, oh, just throw a number out there, $10,000. That means I've got $10,000 in my pocket. I'm like, I don't know, man, your printing might be $7,000. Your shipping might be $2,000, and they don't think about that. Like, you really only have $1,000 in your pocket if you're lucky. So,
yeah. So to me, that was kind of the weird part of this process, that I almost felt like I was building like a political platform, like I'm running for mayor, right? Like, we're going to clean up the park, and we're going to, potholes are getting fixed, and we're going to get rid of the library fines. So I kind of approached this book of like, I want to make sure that the book is done. I want to make sure that everyone that, had work got paid. And then my last crowdfunding project was my coloring book, which 2021, right? Mm-hmm. It's like dog years. Like, that in crowdfunding and technology is like, at this point, a lifetime ago, right? And, when I did that book, AI wasn't an issue. Now it is. Yeah. So now, I've had to stop and ponder where it's a hot button. Again, 3 years ago, it was not a hot button topic. So, one of the things that's going to be in my campaign, I have my little platform. Like, this is my promise to you that, like, we didn't use AI in the project, that, the book is done. I minimize all delays, and I want to make sure that everyone gets paid. And it's kind of my pushback on a lot of listening to negativity about people that are like, hey man, I worked on this guy and I did 2 covers and I didn't get paid. And there's so much negativity in the independent comic scene right now with this kind of just, people just treating each other poorly. Again, backers treating, or project creators treating backers poorly. And to your story, backers kind of being unpleasant towards creators. And then, creators, like, they're like crabs in a bucket, like, here, I won't pay you. And, and there's so much of these, I'm not going to name names, but here's
I can, anthologies especially, I see a lot of that with anthologies, and I've seen a lot of, I don't know if we covered it or not, but there are a couple of high profile anthology projects on Kickstarter where the person running the project was out there doing like the press tour and getting all the accolades, and people are like, meanwhile, we're not getting paid. What's going on? Yeah. And it is just I think what's going on with crowdfunding, though, a lot of times is, you're basically seeing the indie comic process, warts and all, laid bare in crowdfunding. Like, this stuff all used to be behind the curtain before. Like, you just go to that convention, that guy would have his book, but you don't know all the drama that was involved in getting that book to you, or what went into it before, or any delays or backbiting or backstabbing, or, what I'm saying? But now with social media and crowdfunding, like, it's all out there.
So I guess to kind of something, say, tell me about your project. Like, to me, that, and I never really thought about that before this project, where I'm like, I have to lay out the philosophy of this project, because, again, I'm not going to name names, but I'd mentioned to you in our pre-chat about that comic book that I gave a small donation to in 2013, and it is still not out. So it's past its 10-year anniversary, right? In 5 years drive. But these things, I pay attention to them, and I just think they're all black eyes. And I thought, what I want my projects, like in that book, and again, I'm not going to name it, but all the production art for it and everything, it was awesome. Like the actual art, that the person that was working on it, they did really good work. But the guts and the DNA were about taking money and not giving the backers what they wanted. So who cares how nice it is? And obviously there's been some really high profile Kickstarters that they've just been embarrassments. And who cares how talented you are if the spirit and heart behind your project is in the wrong place. So I really took it to heart to say, I need to make sure that my next project is going to do right by the backers and the people that work with me on the book, because I think we as creators all need to do our part to make this space better, because we all benefit. Like, I want more people to take their books seriously. And if it means slowing them down like I have, like, Jason, where's your book? Where's your book? Hey, I'm working on it. Right? I have a little checklist that I put out on social media. It's like, here's what's being done. I've got some stretch goal black and white covers. I redid all the back issues, main covers that are all being recolored. And I'm working with my friend Tara to get all the graphics right for Kickstarter. When that's done, we're going to set a launch date, and then I'm going to do some scheduling for, doing appearances and everything else to promote it. But anyway, that's the guts of the book. So it's, like I said, I feel like I'm running for mayor of Comic Book Town, of like, this is why I want you to vote for me. Because I've got, I literally, I'm going to have it on there's going to be a platform. Here's my platform, and to me, even if people don't get it or understand it, to me, it's about doing right by everybody around me, because I want people to be proud of the project and like feel that they're being taken care of. All that being said, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I mean, that definitely is. I mean, because there was a lot of talk. Yeah, I'm not going to name names, but there's a lot of talk of like, the mainstream doing things wrong and the customer service not being there like it used to. And then you see a lot of balls getting dropped, in the indie space too. And I mean, in some cases, it's just like, we have people that are used to creating, they're not used to shipping, distributing,
sure,
logistics, and that's understandable. But a lot of people I've seen, especially in Kickstarter, they're just like, yeah, hey, we're just going to take the money and like, see ya. Someday you'll get a book, maybe. Yeah, maybe.
And the problem is, I think it's given Kickstarter a black eye. And then I wonder, when these individuals get burned, maybe they would have backed my book, or maybe they would have backed your book. But now they're just like, oh, this stuff's a ripoff and no one cared about me. And they're just out. So, again, to me, it's about making your project, whatever it is, stand up for what's correct. And again, it's taking care of the backers. It's taking care of your collaborators, that your project should stand for being right by the community. All that being said, I can actually talk about the comic, right?
Let's talk about the comic.
So basically, in a nutshell, there's a lot of heavy metal DNA in my books. There's different artists. There's kind of a central set of characters, and it's set in a world that's kind of a little bit of Masters of the Universe if it was put heavy metal. And I love Masters of the Universe. I'm a huge fan. I have been for a long time. I've from a distance, I've enjoyed, hearing you and Geeky, talk about Masters of the Universe for the last couple of years. It always makes me smile. Man. So one of my goals, through doing Lords for, since 2016 now, is just to do what I think a Masters of the Universe genre comic would be if I did it, right? And if my friends did it with me. And, so people said, this kind of feels like Masters of the Universe. And I'm like, cool, but I don't want you to feel it's a copy, like it's the flavor. But there's a different editorial stance. So it's a little bit like Heavy Metal, black and white anthology, where it's like this cast of characters, heroes and villains, and they're interacting. There's a main story that goes through each issue. Then there's little side stories that give you little glimpses, which is always kind of one of the fun things about Heavy Metal. And then there's a little bit of like Warhammer 40K, kind of like weird, over detailed, strange, monsters and magic and robots. And, I really feel that the 5th issue, we're hitting our stride, after 8 years, right? As we try to get towards the end of it. It's going to have 3 stories, 44 pages. The art is outstanding. It's just a lot of fun. And, I know that, you guys have always, held a flag high for your love of the old school Masters of the Universe. And
Oh, yeah.
I think for fans of old school Masters of the Universe, right? If you like the old 80s Masters and things like that, and you like Heavy Metal, then you're on my team. Like, we have the same core beliefs. And that's why I think, those fans of those things would enjoy giving my book a chance. I can't guarantee they'll like it, but I think they probably will. And again, anthology book, black and white, weird science fantasy, over the top heroes, weird villains. That's really what it's all about. It's just fun.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of fun. I love this battle turtle you've got going on, the Battle City Turtle thing. This is pretty cool. Like you can see and that's the thing, just kind of bring it back to Heavy Metal. Like Masters of the Universe I don't think that line would have existed without Heavy Metal. It was basically Heavy Metal for kids. It was a mashup of fantasy and science fiction. It was all the stuff that was big then: barbarians and robots and spaceships and warlocks and they got about as close to I guess Heavy Metal as you could get and still have it as like a PG-13 line. Especially those original character designs. They look like something that came out of Heavy Metal.
I 100% agree that there's definitely a common DNA there, and it's funny. I mean, we all reflect the things that we like. So, I mean, as we've been chatting, this is a great conversation. I've talked about my passion for, Heavy Metal Magazine, and we chatted about Masters of the Universe and the 80s comics and things like that. And, so you say, Heavy Metal in, Heavy Metal out, right? So, I mean,
yeah.
It's funny. People say to me, this book reminds me a lot of Heavy Metal or, Masters of the Universe. And I'm like, good. Like, cause that's the point, you know what I mean? Cause that's, you don't want to just ape it and copy it, but you want to be inspired where it's like, I sense that you really love Heavy Metal. You love Thundar the Barbarian. You love Masters of the Universe, right? That those are the things that I take my inspiration for. And I want to tell my own story in a space similar to that and give, the readers that like the things that I like, something that they would enjoy, but it's original and can stand on its own 2 feet, but you can appreciate where it came from. And I've had a lot of fun making it. It's a lot of work, but it's probably one of the most fun I've had as a creator, because I force myself to write. I forced myself to edit. I've forced myself to learn formatting. There's a lot of things that I've learned. So right there, we're looking at some of the new revised covers for the old issues. So revamp them up a little bit. But it's really forced me to, grow as a creative into things that are part of making comics, but things that I never did until a couple years ago. So I've really felt that it's expanded my ability to be creative and tell a story that I think is really awesome. And I, I'm sure you and Geeky have a similar experience with Crimson Wren and your books. That probably the funnest thing is you kind of see it in your head like a movie, right? And then it's like, okay, how do I convert it out of this meat box into something that you can read? And, you really realize how hard that is to convert it out, because I know with Cosmos, I can see it in my head as an anime. Like I see it like it's playing. And it's like, okay, but how do I get that out of here to there? And it's a challenge, right?
Yeah. And then working with we've started working with other artists now, so that's always like, sometimes it's like, well, that's not how I would have done it, but I actually like this better, or so that's always like, a different that's a totally different thing too, because then it's like you're trying to get the idea out of the meat box and put it into somebody else's meat box and then get it onto the paper,
So one of the cool things with Lords, really early on in the first issue, the two gentlemen that co-created it with me, Dennis and Jason, they had more ideas than I could get done at any given time. And so we had other artists come in. So we've always kind of had a tradition in every issue of getting, guest artists and whatnot. We've had a couple guys repeat. So we've had a couple repeat DNA, and we've lost some people due to some personal circumstances. We picked up people, and I've always felt that one of the strengths of Lords of the Cosmos was that we really have a diverse group of artists and writers, which is great because it makes it easier to introduce other people in different styles. So it isn't like, well, you're the only person that's done it. So if, Neon draws something, it's like, it's not how it looks. So I think we've really benefited from a very diverse group of creators. And we've got two really killer artists for the next issue. One is brand new and one is a repeat from issue 4. So there's the both of those guys, I think technically are way better than me. So it's been really humbling, giving them stories that I helped co-write and seeing them do it, because I'm like, you guys are really freaking good. These two artists, Luigi and Sasha, they're both from Italy. I connected with them on Instagram, and man, oh man, they're talented, dude. And it's just, like I said, it's humbling having them do my characters, because I'm like, you guys, you're better than me, man. Like, so that's been humbling to see what they do, and then to really kind of riff off some of these other artists over the years, because we've done some things that like other artists have like questioned, and then they start making up stuff. And, one of the artists that we worked with in a couple issues, he had said to me at one point, that there's so much that you guys have kind of created in this like wacky 80s sandbox that like, I just kind of feel that you're really letting some of us explore, and you're really, liberal with letting us take different directions with how we draw the characters. And, you have some basic models, but, because we've included so many other people and let them create within our basic parameters, it's really been awesome. But at first it was kind of scary and a struggle, because it's like, these are my babies, and, oh my God, what if, someone makes it a little different? And, that was kind of a hard mental process, but now it's incredibly exciting to do that. The gentleman that mentioned the flashlight, and that was Dave Newbold. He's another ridiculously talented artist that's worked with us on a couple issues of Lords. And I'm actually shocked that he's not like a really famous U.S. comic book artist, because he's another guy that when he's worked in the book, I always kind of look at his work and I'm like, David is like 10 times better than me. I always kind of feel like embarrassed putting my stuff next to his stuff, because he's so freaking talented. So like I said, we've been blessed with some super, super talented people working on the book. So, yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So Lords of the Cosmos, issue 5 is going to be, when's it launching? When it's done, right?
It's going to be later this year. It's okay. To the point now that it's got a couple loose ends. I'm going to get some test printing done. And then once I have everything where I want it to be, I'm going to set a date. If I had to guess, I'm going to say probably this fall. Okay. But I don't want to pin myself into a date, because then what if there's a delay, but I'd say probably this fall.
Okay. Awesome. So yeah, follow Jason, follow him on Kickstarter, go to jasonlenox.com. And he's putting some art out there. Any place else you'd like people to follow that, Jason?
The easiest places to probably follow me is just at Lenox Artist, Lenox Artist, Twitter, Instagram. You can follow me on Facebook at Jason Lenox Illustrator on Facebook, and then I have my Etsy store, which is Lenox Art Emporium. All easy places to find, but probably just the at Lenox Artist is probably the easiest, Instagram and Twitter. And then I have the links for the Kickstarter on both of those, easy to find at the top. So
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a great conversation. We'll have to do it again sometime.
Yeah, sincerely appreciate it, man. This is it's a treat. It's a treat to catch up. I just wish Geeky was here, right? But
yeah, she doesn't do the podcast as much. We do another podcast. We do the Disney one, and we just did that today too. And she's like, I can't talk. She's like, I can't talk anymore because we do we probably do 3 or 4 regular videos a day, and then we do the podcast, and then then we have other work that we do too. So it's just like.
You guys are you guys are soldiers, man. I mean, it's just I'm staggered how many notifications I get from YouTube. It's like you guys seriously are working.
I'm shocked you're getting the notifications. It's a whole other issue,
right? But I get them. You guys
Awesome.
are seriously. It's just keep on going, man.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We'll definitely catch up again. Guys, subscribe to the D-Res podcast on Spotify. Where are we at? Spotify, Amazon, iTunes, wherever you found it at, wherever podcasts are, we're there somewhere. And we'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Thanks again for listening. More news and videos are available on our website at www.clownfishtv.com and on our YouTube channel, Clownfish TV. You can buy official merchandise, Clownfish comic books, and more at shopclownfish.com. If you like this show, please consider subscribing and leaving us a positive review on iTunes and other podcast platforms. If you're looking to help support this show financially, go to clownfishsupport.com. If you'd like to sponsor an episode of this show, send us an email at business@webreef.io. This podcast is a production of Clownfish Studios, LLC and Web Reef Media, proudly made in Pittsburgh, USA.